I have thought about the TWA investigation very often over the years. It's almost been a nagging thought. It's the one assignment that I was given in my entire career, 42 years as an investigator in one form or another, that I didn't finish, and I like to finish my work.
It was about 8:30.
I was standing on the bridge looking south.
I was at Davis Park with my two young daughters. So I'm actually heading east, and I just got done talking to my coworker.
It was a very warm night, and it was kind of stifling almost.
We were taking a walk that evening.
We were taking a nice night flight.
I was walking with a friend of mine.
I was standing on the dock, and I was looking out in a southeasterly direction.
I was on my boat.
I was at Merritt Beach.
We just happened to look up in the sky.
And all of a sudden, I see something rise up from behind these trees over here.
We just had an explosion out there about 5 miles away, 6 miles away. It looked like an explosion of some sort on my 9 o'clock position.
507, you reported an explosion, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir. It blew up in the air, and then we saw 2 fireballs go down into the water.
Thank you very much, sir. TWA 800, if you hear center ident. TWA 800, center, TWA 800, if you hear center ident.
I think that was him.
I think so.
God bless him.
The U.S. Coast Guard tonight is reporting an explosion about 10 miles south of Long Island.
747 was on its way to Paris from JFK in New York.
We now have it that TWA Flight 800, a commercial 747 aircraft carrying 212 passengers, a crew of 17, has exploded in midair about 10 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean.
Bodies are being pulled out of the water right now. No survivors so far.
There's a lot of search boats.
One witness described a big fireball with pieces coming off it.
I was pulling my boat back in, I was tying it up, and the guy next to me was tying his boat up. And the guy said, "Hey, look at the flare." And I turned around, and I'm like, wow, somebody must have some trouble in the bay. And no sooner I said that, the thing just like exploded.
The beeper went off. It was our flight operations dispatch. As the head of flight operations safety and the chief safety investigator, I was hoping it was a drill, but it wasn't. I was in Atlanta getting ready to support the '96 Olympics. My phone rang, which was my unit chief from the explosive unit telling me to catch the first plane out to New York tomorrow morning.
I was at home, and my pager went off, and I was on the go team.
We gathered all the people that we thought we would need, and we arrived about 4 in the morning at JFK Airport in New York.
Nous étions dans notre appartement. En allumant la télévision pour voir les nouvelles du matin, j'ai vu un avion en flammes, c'est-à-dire on ne voyait pas l'avion, on voyait une mer de flammes. Et j'ai fait la réflexion à ma femme, puisque nous attendions le retour de notre fils, que c'était peut-être l'avion de notre fils. Mais c'est seulement une demi-heure après que nos enfants sont arrivés pour nous dire ce qui est arrivé.
The command post was at the East Mauritius Coast Guard Station, which was the closest Coast Guard station to where the plane actually went down.
We went to the Coast Guard station at Mauritius immediately. There were hundreds and hundreds of police officers there.
My first impression of the investigation was martial law. There were approximately 1,000 cops, it seemed there, of which half of them were FBI agents. They had guards on the hangar, they had cops at the Coast Guard station, and it seemed very unusual for an accident investigation.
Helicopters were landing and taking off like every 3 or 4 minutes.
Wreckage was coming in, and bodies were coming in.
One of the people that went out with me on the first morning was a former Army helicopter pilot who had significant experience with Black Hawk helicopters. One of the helicopters came in and he said, "That's odd." He said, "That's a special operations helicopter." And I said, "Oh, that is odd. I guess maybe they just couldn't find one and they borrowed it." And he said, "Well, I don't know."
Just a little while ago, a temporary morgue was set up on the beach in Long Island.
Right in here is the temporary morgue facilities. This is where the boats would dock and unload the victims. Notice that hoses and various bottles of chlorine would be here to hose down the boats if there was any spillage in the back of the boats of biological fluids. The bodies would be photographed. A tag would be placed on the body, and if there was any jewelry present, that also would be photographed.
The FBI supervised the transport of the wreckage. It was put on Army National Guard trucks and trucked to Calverton, Long Island, which is about 10 miles away.
I can still smell the hangar. It smelled of death. And it just was not a pleasant place to be. It was very, it took a toll on all of us. You walked in the hangar through all the guards, and it was not a pleasant work environment.
We set up the staging area at the hangar, and I noticed there was a great deal of friction between the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The ATF agents, most of whom have significant more experience in investigating explosions than any FBI agent, were relegated to sitting at picnic benches and tables. They weren't allowed to do anything.
On my first day there, when I had the tour of the Calverton hangar, there was a structural piece of the aircraft lying on the floor that had 3 holes blown through it like a 22 through a tin can with an obvious entrance and exit side of the penetration. I was about to take a picture of it, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't take that picture." And I said, "Well, who are you to tell me not to take the picture?" And he said, "FBI, don't take the picture." The word was in the press at that time that eyewitnesses had already begun to report smoke trails corkscrewing up toward the airplane.
The FBI today raised new questions that a missile or some kind of streaking object was seen in the sky at the same time TWA Flight 800 exploded.
We do have some information that there was something in the sky. A number of people have seen it. A number of people have described it very similarly.
The attitude of our senior management was, don't get too involved, the FBI is going to handle it. It's a missile or a bomb, and we're not going to get involved in it.
Most all of us felt that it was only a matter of time before we found the piece that would confirm that it was a criminal event.
Explosive traces of unknown origin have been found relating to TWA Flight 800.
The FBI, we had our own mini lab set up on the site. We got multiple positive hits. Anything we had a positive hit off had to be sent down to the FBI laboratory where they could actually run a confirmatory test. 3 examples of that. It was rather disconcerting because the test at the lab was confirmatory on those, meaning that those were actual explosive residues.
On attendait qu'on nous dise on a récupéré le corps de votre fils. On nous donnait des informations dans des conférences de presse qui avaient lieu une le matin, une le soir. Du matin au soir, ces informations changeaient. Ils nous disaient qu'ils avaient trouvé quelque chose, puis le soir, ils disaient « Ah ben non, on ne l'a pas trouvé ». C'est une accumulation de petites choses qui fait qu'on arrive à un moment donné à se dire « Mais ils nous mentent, ils sont en train d'inventer quelque chose ».
It was very early on. We didn't have many pieces in the hangar. And Jim said, hey, I've got something here you need to look at. So I went over and looked at it, and it was the leading edge of the right wing, as I recall.
The part was really a very sturdy piece of metal. I was convinced that the part had been damaged by a high explosion because of the entrance hole and the exit hole, where you could obviously see the entrance side and obviously see the exit side.
Because Jim wasn't allowed to take a picture of that part, he looked around the hangar and found other parts with similar holes. And, you know, I'm looking at this, and I just don't know how these could occur normally in a fire.
I decided to take it over to the FBI field lab.
The FBI had a little room that they controlled, and of course we couldn't go in there.
I knocked on the door and said, I hear you have a machine to test for nitrates in here. And they said, yes, we do. And I said, can you show me how it works? And they said, sure. We'll run a test sample for you. And I said, well, how about you running my test sample? Swab this piece and check that for me. And so they did. And sure enough, it tested positive, which I was sure it would do, positive for residue of high explosions. So they picked up the phone and called somebody. In 90 seconds, 3 FBI agents ran in the room in their coats and ties and physically pushed me aside and wouldn't let me hear the conversation. Then they turned to me and said, the machine has frequent false positives.
There were a considerable number of positives because the Aegis machine is susceptible to false positives.
He was told that the machine frequently yields false positives.
That's not true. At the point of TW-800, the Aegis detector was very specific and very sensitive.
The FBI is saying there were frequent false positives with the Aegis. Is that possible?
No, on the contrary. The Aegis is extremely sensitive. It's sensitive down to about 50 to 100 picograms. That's a very small amount of material. It's very rare, if ever, to see a false alarm with the Aegis.
So they ran the test 4 more times, they said, but they physically would not let me watch them run the test. And they turned to me then and said, the last 4 tests are negative. We're going to declare the first test a false positive and the overall results negative.
The FBI then said, oh, we've got to take this down to our lab in Washington.
And verify that diagnosis.
I don't understand why material would be taken from that hangar to the FBI laboratory. It could be sampled right at that hangar. When you take it anywhere, you're exposing it to potential contamination vectors.
And the part disappeared, never to be returned.
It never returned.
He said the FBI took it to Washington, D.C. to do further testing.
Yeah.
But it never came back. It just disappeared.
That's not true.
It's not true.
No. Okay. Nothing ever disappeared.
Okay. Everything. Well, he said it just never came back.
That's just not true.
I talked to Jim Kallstrom about this, and he laughed when I told him things disappeared from the hangar and never to return.
I'd laugh that he'd laugh. He knows better than that.
What would happen to wreckage once it got to Washington? What would it?
After it was re-examined down in Washington, whether it was, if it was positive, where it was indicating it could be an actual piece of evidence, then it wouldn't come back.
To my knowledge, everything came back. Nothing disappeared. Right. I couldn't stand for something disappearing. Mm-hmm. Of course it didn't disappear.
Many of the bodies had parts of metal embedded in the bodies, pieces of metal that we couldn't identify. We initially separated out these particles of metal in plastic containers, categorized by the number we gave them and as to whether they came from the surface of the body or they came from the internal tissues of the body. And these were turned over to the FBI.
Normally, I'd expect to receive the parts as he had discharged them from his office. But then at some point, someone from the FBI presented some plastic containers with metal parts in them. They weren't separated as Dr. Whetley had described. They were pretty much together. We certainly lost identification as to who the parts were associated with. If you can associate a wound with a certain particle, it tells you something about direction, it tells you something about velocity of those parts. But once they're combined, there wasn't really much analysis we could do.
That early evening, my wife and I, we were walking up this road right here at Smiths Point County Park, and I happened to notice on my left-hand side, just over the dunes, I seen a streak of light going just about straight up. It was, leaning a little to the right.
We started to get witnesses calling in, and then we sent agents out to interview these witnesses, and eventually we interviewed several hundred witnesses that actually witnessed the event. The initial witness statements all indicated that it might have been a missile because they were all describing seeing a streaking object in the sky and then a big fireball. Sounded very much like a missile.
Half a second after that, there was this bright starburst, all white light, and it just, expanded in a matter of like a split second, and it was huge.
What the FBI did, which was so onerous to me, is that they did all the interviewing of eyewitnesses. With the FBI now being sole interrogators, they kept the NTSB out.
We've always conducted our own interviews. We're pretty good at it. We've been doing it for years. The vast majority of witnesses have never been interviewed by the National Transportation Safety Board. I find it unconscionable.
My name is Vasilis Bakounis. I'm from Greece. I work for 25 years in Olympic Airways. In the mid of 90s, I went to United States to get my commercial pilot license. On that day, as I was flying at approximately 2,000 feet over the shore of Long Island, I saw the light coming out of the sea. I follow that light for many seconds before it makes a kind of radius to the right. And then I saw the explosion. And then pieces of flame was falling down like an umbrella of flames. When I saw the lights starting climbing, it was really, really low, very low. And then start climbing, passing my altitude, and the explosion.
We will know what happened on that airplane, and I guarantee you that the resources of the FBI and the great law enforcement team we have at every level will be used on that investigation.
Virtually nothing that the FBI learned about the investigation was provided to us.
We didn't have much cooperation from the FBI on any part of the investigation.
They had their own explosive techs in the hangar. They had their own metallurgists in the hangar. We actually had FBI agents on the Navy ships, and as soon as the divers would bring a piece of debris to the surface, our agents would take possession of it. They controlled the access to the wreckage. We were never allowed to see it until all the evidence techs from the FBI had looked at it and decided that we could see it. I mean, this was unheard of. They had video recordings of the ROV searches under the water.
It became almost adversarial. One time, they asked us to watch underground video looking for engine or engine parts. It was a VCR tape, and they got the machine set up and running, and it was basic machine, and the FBI guy stayed there, and I said, you know, you can go off and do whatever you need to do. We can run this machine. No. Okay. Anyway, and looking at the tape, there'd be a little time clock on the top that had all the data, like the heading, the depth, and time. And after a while, I began noticing that on the same heading, there'd be interruptions in the time clock. And I turned to the FBI guy and said, this tape's been edited. And I said, I want to see the unedited version. And he said, no.
Death is nothing. I have only passed into the next room. I am me, you are you. We were for each other, we are always. Call me by the name you have always used. Speak to me as you have always done. Change not your tone, but be solemn or sad in manner. Laugh at the things we laughed at together. Pray, smile, think of me, pray for me.
They had barges that they would load parts on, and they were to keep a log on all the parts they recovered. So they knew where all the parts came from because they were trying to assess the breakup sequence of the airplane.
Not all of the evidence from one part of the airplane is going to fall in one spot.
There's actually 3 debris fields.
We had tags, and they were color-coded according to the area that they were found in. They also had latitude, longitude on them, the date that they were recovered.
About a month into the investigation, I noticed that some of the materials in the hangar had been disturbed at night.
One of my investigators, John Desmond, came to me one day and said, some of these tags are being changed. And I said, what do you mean they're being changed? He said, well, they're being changed from yellow to white. Somebody was changing tags on us.
Now, there are only 2 keys to that hangar. I had one, the security chief had the other.
I went over to the FBI and informed them that we thought somebody was in our hangar after we locked down at night.
They set up video surveillance in my hangar and found that 3 FBI agents from another office had entered the hangar for purposes unknown in the wee hours of the morning.
We were told it was a couple of new FBI agents.
And did they ever tell you who they were?
No.
On one occasion, an agent from California was brought in.
There was the famous incident where little Ricky Hahn was out with a piece of fuselage trying to bend it in the middle of the night.
I found him in the main hangar with a hammer pounding on some of the wreckage, trying to flatten it out.
The guy was hammering on a piece of fuselage.
That defies any common sense. You don't alter or destroy evidence.
You're altering the shape of a material which has acquired that shape as a result of some forces.
That was brought to the investigator in charge's attention, Mr. Dickinson. Nothing happened. Every time there was a problem, it was ignored.
It was about 8:30. The sun was still up.
We interviewed several hundred witnesses that actually witnessed the event.
I was standing on the bridge looking south.
It was a very warm night. We were taking a walk that evening.
Taking a nice night flight.
I was walking with a friend of
I
mine.
was standing on the dock and I was looking out in a southeasterly direction.
I was at the, very upset, even still, all these years later. I was at Davis Park with my 2 young daughters. I had just put them to bed.
And I was standing on the bridge looking south.
All of a sudden, I decided I had to go outside, get the towels off the front deck, bring them in the house. I go outside, turn to the left.
Just happened to look up in the sky.
And I see something that's going across right in my line of sight.
I actually see something behind a tree line, more or less like my thumb, go up in the air.
I saw what appeared to be cheap fireworks.
I noticed a streak of light heading up towards the sky.
I saw this white light shoot up in the sky. There's something going up in the sky.
This rocket went up in the air.
And I seen this white light. I said, oh, someone shut off a flare.
It looked like a flare going up.
And I'm trying to figure out what it is because it looked completely out of place.
Larger than a standard flare.
And it appeared behind a house to my right, and it went up and out to sea.
I watched this object go outbound towards the horizon.
Was moving very rapidly.
It was fast.
Zoop, just like that.
It's going very quickly. It's very, very shiny.
Kind of like a little smoke plume behind it.
Looked like a missile vapor trail to me.
Then it turns to the left.
Then it turned.
And it arced over.
It looked like it curved to the right.
Then it momentarily disappeared.
Disappeared for a second or two.
And it sort of disappeared from my vision.
And then I lost it because there was some clouds. And then I saw it again.
Goes up, and there was a plane that was flying along.
And I saw a flash of an aircraft light. Blink, blink, blink.
Goes up right to the side of the plane, and I remember thinking to myself, I was like very frightened that it was going to hit the plane, and it was poof, didn't actually hit the plane. It exploded right next to it. Now, I know nothing about military or any of that, so I don't know if it's exploding next to it is still significant.
I also noticed on the horizon a very bright mast light of a ship. From the mast light, there was another flash, and I saw another object rise out of the ocean.
The next thing, something comes up from underneath the plane.
I saw an explosion.
This big explosion. And I'm looking at this and I go, I remember saying aloud to myself, gee, look at that, a plane broken in the sky.
And then the very next day, the FBI came to talk to me. It was almost abusive, in a sense. They took me into the back room. They said, well, we heard that you saw something. Tell us what you saw. I told them what I saw, and they looked me straight in the face and said, you did not see that. You saw nothing.
Then they decided to jump to a conclusion. Once that happened, objectivity went out the window as far as I'm concerned.
That's when the NTSB put on their major push for a mechanical failure.
And were you in agreement with that push?
We didn't find any part of the airplane that indicated a mechanical failure.
They said the airplane exploded from the center fuel tank, cause unknown, suspect a fuel explosion.
Early in the investigation, some of the first hardware that was brought up was from that center wing tank. Some of the parts from that tank showed evidence of burning, melted aluminum. So we knew we had a fire in that center wing tank.
I think you can see from the forensic evidence something did happen in or around the center fuel tank.
The plane sat out in the sun. It was pretty hot in July, which increased the temperature of the tank and the aircraft to vaporize the fuel so you'd have enough vapor there to cause an explosion if you ignite the fuel.
The question remaining is what sparked the explosion?
What ignited those vapors?
Well, that's has never been fully proven.
The theory was that wiring had failed and sparked the explosion.
We never found any of that. We didn't find any evidence in the wiring on the aircraft that would have indicated that a spark occurred inside the center wing tank to blow it up.
Did anybody in the investigation find this wiring?
Not to my knowledge, no.
The only wiring in the center fuel tank is to the fuel quantity gauge, and that's a fine wire meant for milliamps. The main power on the airplane is 115 volt AC, and it would have taken 1,200 volts to arc the fuel quantity probe, and there's no 1,200 volt electricity on the airplane outside of the engine igniters, and it's individual to each engine. So the cause of the ignition of the center fuel tank had to be something other than airplane electronics.
What I'm going to do is to request that Mr. Kallstrom come up to the table at this point. Mr. James K. Kallstrom, who is Assistant Director in charge of the New York office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mr. Kallstrom, would you just give us some information on how many witnesses on the ground or in other airplanes at the time believed they saw something coming from the ground headed toward that plane?
Well, I wouldn't want to say that they all saw something coming from the ground. There were about 200 people that saw events in the sky that they described, none of which described the missile.
How many of them would you say saw approximately the same thing?
A good bulk of the people on the shore report, and we triangulate, that they're describing roughly the same event. You know, so let's say 60 or 70. We had witnesses that saw things in the sky, and we talked about the possibility that a missile, as horrid as that is, could have taken down this airplane, and we thought that needs to be addressed. Could you play the videotape, please?
The following program was produced by the Central Intelligence Agency.
It was November 18th, 1997. I was in the middle of grad school studying physics, and I was sitting on my couch flipping through the channels with my girlfriend, and the FBI came on, and they said it was about this plane crash, which I had heard things about in the past, and I was interested.
Of particular concern to FBI investigators were reports from dozens of eyewitnesses who, on the evening of July 17th, recalled seeing an object, usually described as a flare or firework, ascend and culminate in an explosion. Was it a missile? Did foreign terrorists destroy the aircraft? At the request of the FBI, CIA weapons analysts looked into this possibility. The CIA's conclusion? The eyewitnesses did not see a missile. Just after the aircraft exploded, it pitched up abruptly and climbed several thousand feet from 13,800 feet to about 17,000 feet. Those who said they saw something ascend and culminate in an explosion probably saw the burning aircraft ascend and erupt into a fireball, not a missile. To date, there is no evidence that anyone saw a missile shoot down TWA Flight 800.
Not a missile. Never was, never will be.
I felt assaulted. I felt as if I was being lied to. It looked more like a big piece of propaganda than the results of an air crash investigation. And I just knew that there was something wrong. Throughout the animation, they had the underlined words, "not a missile," and the narrator would say, "It was not a missile."
Not a missile.
It just seemed odd to me that they were focused so much on telling us what it wasn't rather than what it was. That night, I went on my dial-up connection, and that's when I found out there was an eyewitness in the air at the time, Air National Guard captain who was in a Black Hawk helicopter, who saw an object strike another object that was coming from the right. Right then and there, I said, my goodness. So I thought, well, do I believe this article that I'm reading on the internet? And I thought, well, I just go right to the source themselves. There was a website that listed eyewitnesses that were listed by the media, eyewitness names. There was a Runyon, there was an Angelides, there was a Myron. I think those were the first 3 people I called. And I said, I'm just an interested citizen over here. And they told me what they saw, and it was in vivid terms. And I said, thank you very much. And I called the next person. They all had the same story. And that's when I got hooked. Because these people saw something that night. So the CIA video, what do you think of that?
It's a nice cartoon.
I think the Zoom climb is fraud, waste, and abuse. I don't know how they got the CIA to get involved in this absolutely ridiculous animation.
I don't think that there's any engineering justification that says that the airplane can do what their video said it did.
Every pilot thought, baloney, that could never happen. Trying to claim that the airplane tipped up enough after the nose came off and climbed.
The nose weighs about 90,000 pounds.
If you disrupt the center of gravity that much and the airplane tips up, it's going to either stall and fall or break apart instantly.
Did you happen to watch the CIA animation about what happened?
Yes, I did.
And what did you think about that animation?
That animation didn't resemble anything that I saw in any way whatsoever.
I actually watched it to the point when they showed that the plane split in two and one half went up and one half went down. As soon as I seen that part of their video, I didn't watch any more after that because it's just incredibly wrong, and that's not what I seen. That is not what happened that evening.
Did you ever see anything rise up out of the fireball?
No, absolutely not. That fireball fell like a stone.
That streak that you saw, could that have been an aircraft?
No, it was far too fast.
I've never seen a plane go that fast, up like that.
These people on the shoreline saw this bright streak originating from near the surface, not a point 2.5 miles in the sky. How they calculated that zoom climb. If I could get that information, I could prove that they jimmied the data. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to the CIA and NTSB for the data and calculations that they used for that zoom climb. They refused to give me the information.
But Ray's efforts weren't a total loss. He actually got some internal memos from the CIA, and I filed a lawsuit against the CIA separately and got other documents. And between the two of us, we had a nice little history of emails from inside that small group in the CIA that did the animation. One of the documents specifically discussed eyewitness Mike Wire. He's standing on a bridge, and he sees this, what he calls a cheap firework, come by a house and kind of arcs up and goes out.
What I saw looked like cheap fireworks coming up from behind roof line of the double chimneyed house. It went on a 45 to 50 degree angle out to sea, and it wavered, zigzagged up and down.
The memo shows that the team that created the animation knew that the ascending light that Mike Wire saw couldn't have been the aircraft. But their animation that went on national television told a completely different story.
A fourth eyewitness reported that he watched a white light, perhaps a firework, traveling upward at a steep angle.
The video shows the light starting at a point high up in the sky, not behind the house the way Mike Wire described it.
The CIA animation shows it approximately here in the sky, and then it proceeds from there as a streak of light up into the sky, but that's not what I saw. What I saw, something left behind the house and went up to the plane. The plane blew up.
After watching the animation, did that cause you to do anything?
Well, that's when I called the FBI, and I said, you seem to be a little off on what you're depicting here. It's not the way the events unfolded.
And what'd they say?
They said, well, do you want to change your story? And I said, no. I said, but you really need to send somebody out here that can understand what I'm explaining.
Okay, and what happened?
Never heard from him.
People who don't know each other, all up and down the coast, they saw the same thing. And you're saying there was a mass misperception.
Well, not necessarily a misperception. This has been documented over and over again in traumatic events. The human mind tends to change things, to change the sequences just because of the trauma, what they saw. They don't remember things in the sequence.
Well, they're all very consistent. So if you're saying it's mass misperception, which you are, really, right?
I guess.
I find that very bizarre.
I can't explain it. I'm not a psychology expert.
But you did explain it.
Well, I explained it the way it was explained to me.
If you don't mind me being blunt, if the airplane didn't climb, then the answer for what the witnesses saw in the sky might be an unacceptable one.
All of a sudden, this rocket went up in the air, and then there was this big explosion. Days later, the FBI came to visit. And they sat down and they were talking to me and they were asking me questions, and I told them my story, and he had his little pad. And then when the interview was over, they looked at me and they said, you have your papers in to become an American citizen, don't you? And I said, yes, I'm waiting to be called. They said, well, it would be very wise of you if you want to become an American citizen to keep very quiet about this and not to talk about it. And so
Incredible.
I didn't, because I figured, you know, I wanted to become an American citizen.
David Mayer was a relatively new NTSB employee who had no training or experience in any aspect of transportation accident investigation. Almost a year after the investigation began, I noticed that he had come to my hangar and started to change evidence tags. Never bothered to ask me, just started changing them. The things that he did technically were illegal. There are, I think, 10 or 12 pieces of evidence where he altered the location from which they were recovered.
In one case, we had a piece that was originally recovered in the yellow zone, and it was moved to the red zone because it made things look nicer. One piece, the FQ beam under the center tank, came down the yellow zone. Well, it would have fit much better with the exploding center tank theory if it had come down in the red zone. So it was moved to the red zone.
You're basically telling me that this was an agenda-driven investigation.
I think there's a strong possibility of that. And the agenda was that this is an accident, make it so.
It's about 22 minutes after the hour, and Jim Hall, who is the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, is in Baltimore. Good morning, Mr. Hall.
Morning, Brian.
Tell us what's going to go on today.
Well, Brian, we're going to have a public hearing on the TWA 800 accident. It's 121st hearing the board has held on a major aviation accident. These hearings are an exercise in public accountability.
National Transportation and Safety Board hearings on the TWA Flight 800 crash focus today on the 747 center fuel tank.
After they've gotten to a certain stage of investigation, the NTSB holds a public hearing.
Prior to the public hearing in Baltimore, we had what you call a pre-hearing conference. At its conclusion, I was asked to come to the IIC, the investigator in charge office, Al Dickinson. And in his office, he sat me down and told me that I was not allowed to ask any questions or speak at the public hearing. And I asked him, I said, Al, I've been on this investigation I don't understand this. And he said, if you believe in corporate memory, you won't ask any questions or speak at the public hearing.
What could you possibly say that would disrupt the hearing?
Oh, I could get up and say, well, you know, we have great concerns about the accuracy of your database, and we'd like to have a thorough, complete audit of your database. We could have said that. In fact, our lawyer at TWA complained to the NTSB about the tag database being inadequate and too unreliable for any analysis or conclusions, and that, quote, far from settled investigatory information and analysis would be presented at the hearing.
In all of the accident investigations I have participated in, eyewitness testimony was an integral part of it. Not this time.
Is it true you're not going to have any of the witnesses, the 200 and some witnesses that just were eyewitnesses?
Well, Brian, that is part of the FBI investigation, which was a criminal investigation.
The minute the news came out that the eyewitness portion of that hearing was canceled, I started saying, oh my God, what's going on? This is really big. They don't want these eyewitnesses to talk.
Is there any doubt in your mind as to whether or not this was a missile?
I have no reason in my mind to think that this was a bomb or a missile, and I feel that we've done everything we can to look at that issue.
Mr. Hank Hughes joined the NTSB in 1985. He is a senior investigator assigned to the Office of Aviation Safety.
My report, which was 496 pages in length or thereabouts with photographic supplement, was cut and amended without my knowledge. When I did find out about it, I complained, nothing was done. We were required to provide a factual report, but ordered not to write an analysis.
What? Could you say that again?
We were directed to write a factual report, but not an analysis.
All we issued was factual reports. I was basically requested to supply autopsy reports and photographs and so forth, but there was no analysis.
In all of the other investigations that I've done and every other NTSB investigator I've worked with, the group chairman writes a factual report and then based on that factual report writes an analysis of the significance of the facts and circumstances of that aspect of the accident.
To determine really what happened, you've got to put everybody's findings together and analyze it, which we've done that in every investigation I've been involved in except this one.
What would your analysis have been?
The primary conclusion was the explosive forces came from outside the airplane, not the center fuel tank.
Would that statement have been in your analysis?
If I got the right one.
Let me tell you, this is an honest investigation, and it is being conducted in an honest and open fashion.
I'd just like the panel to answer my question yes or no. If you can't, I want you to say you can't answer it. First question, Mr. Hall. To this point, is there any physical evidence, conclusive forensic physical evidence, to prove that it was a mechanical failure that caused the explosion of the center fuel tank? Yes or no? I heard a lot of testimony.
No, but we're looking at that. There are things that we...
I want a one-question answer. I know this is tough at this point.
Yeah, no.
No, okay. Mr. Karlstrom, were there in fact traces of PETN and RDX found in that plane wreckage?
There were explosive chemicals found.
Now, the FAA did a historical record search on the aircraft involved and found out that actually before the crash, it was at St. Louis Airport overnight.
We were told that in St. Louis, a bomb-sniffing canine training session occurred where they left some residue by mistake of the explosive that the FBI had found.
You know for sure that the dog was on that plane?
We know for sure. Well, we have the report that document the training, very specifically document the training.
Both Congressman Trafficant and I would like sent to our offices immediately the documentation that shows the plane number.
These are the documents the FBI supplied to Congress. The officer who conducted the exercise did not note the plane number, but testified he was on an empty plane. The plane that would later become Flight 800 left the gate fully boarded with more than 400 passengers at 12:35. The officer finished the exercise at 12 noon. TWA regulations require the cabin crew to be on the plane an hour before departure. They would have been on this plane before the dog training exercise even began. So the exercise could not have happened on the plane that would become Flight 800.
Was it conclusive that a dog was on this plane that blew up?
Yes.
The reason for me standing here today is to inform the news media and the public of an inexplicably flawed official investigation into our nation's worst air disaster. After the Baltimore hearing, I began researching the crash deeper and deeper. I called investigators involved directly, filed Freedom of Information Act requests. I actually sued the CIA and the NTSB. I sued the FBI. And I analyzed thousands of pages of documents, reports, witness statements, radar data, and other documents pertaining to TWA 800. Two weeks before I graduated, I took out 2 student loans to fund a vacation.
Where'd you go?
I went back to Cape Cod.
That's a vacation, that's
I
home.
didn't want to go, vacation meaning not going directly to work anywhere. And I was getting my doctorate in physics, while at the same time being a citizen researcher. I was so burned out, I needed to just not do anything.
And how long did you not do anything?
Well, not doing anything means I did Flight 800 100% of the time.
Yeah, there was a piece of skin blowing off.
Eventually, I really got frustrated by the media's inaccurate reporting and by reporters ignoring the facts of the case. I decided to get in touch with Hank Hughes, Bob Young, Jim Spear, and other insiders who had the courage to come out and speak publicly about their experience. And to make this documentary, to present our evidence, and to show how the government handled the investigation.
Why should the audience believe you? I mean, who are you to be doing this?
Why should the audience believe me? Don't believe me. I don't want the audience to believe me. I want them to look at the evidence and see what it says.
I think the most telling piece of evidence is the splatter that we found on top of the center wing tank.
There was a splatter pattern, a pattern of material that was deposited in the top of the center ring fuel tank. When the center ring fuel tank broke apart, they pieced it back together again when they brought it back from the ocean. They matched it up just like a jigsaw puzzle and found this splatter pattern.
It was continuous across the fracture line of the center wing tank, but it was not found on the fracture surface. And this shows that it was deposited prior to the center wing tank exploding.
We really never could identify what that splatter pattern was from.
Really, it wasn't from anything that melted on the aircraft?
Well, it could have been something that was melted on the aircraft because that went through a fireball.
But this material, I think, was deposited before the fireball.
Well, there's some evidence that that might be the case.
Who was responsible for deciding what potential evidence would be examined?
I was.
Were you aware of something called a splatter pattern on top of the center wing tank?
No.
This splatter crossed the fracture boundaries.
Okay, but what is the splatter pattern?
It's a melted material. The NTSB didn't share this with you?
I've never seen that, never heard of that.
The one person that should have known about this that didn't was me.
If I had heard it at the time, I would try and get some of the samples of the residue and have it analyzed.
You sent a sample from the top surface of the tank of that splatter pattern down to NASA for testing.
Why would he send it down to NASA? There was an instrument right there. He already had the capability on the scene. There was no reason, if you were looking for military explosives, to send it down to NASA.
One of the persons that did the analysis of the residue was a guy named Charlie Bassett down at NASA. And that was about a 3 or 4 hour, maybe 6 hour drive from where I was at. So I drove down there to talk to him about that. And he ended up saying, "Oh, did you hear about my nitrates report?" And I said, What do you mean? You found nitrates in the wreck? He said, "Sure, I did." And so he gave me a copy of the report. NASA sent back a report giving them information that there was nitrates in that splatter.
That's very interesting.
You didn't know that?
No.
And the report that came back from Charlie Bassett, in the splatter pattern, he detected nitrates.
I can't remember that at this point.
You don't remember that nitrates were detected?
No, I don't remember that. I'll have to go back and look at the reports if I have them anymore. I don't know.
Actually, I had the report with me, and I gave it to Dr. Birky to review.
So these tests did not identify uniquely whether it was what the source was. It only tells you that there's nitrate there.
They have this evidence that something melted on the center wing fuel tank before it broke to pieces. Basically, by itself proves that their theory is wrong, but they stopped requesting further examination of that piece.
Nitrates could come from a number of different sources. I mean, nitrates by themselves don't mean anything.
You see, I didn't consider the nitrates sufficient to identify an explosive device.
You needed further testing to do that.
Pardon?
It would have required further testing.
It would have required significant further testing of that. That's correct.
And that testing was never done.
Well, I don't know. It was never done. Nitrate doesn't, in my estimation, my judgment, doesn't prove an explosive device. I mean, you can get nitrates from many things.
But you just said you didn't order the follow-up testing.
No, I didn't.
Why?
I don't have a recollection of why, other than to say that we didn't do it.
People watching might think that that's suspicious.
Well, I'm sure they could say that, and they felt that.
My argument is the follow-up testing that needed to be done wasn't.
I can only answer by saying you're right, it was not done. Should more analytical work been done? Well, that would be appropriate.
We do everything we can. It's our responsibility to do this in a professional, thorough, and methodical way.
In their own animation, the NTSB amended the CIA's version by showing the plane turning to the left before the climb. But the NTSB's theory for what caused the crash has no explanation for that left turn.
What about the left wing? Do you remember any damage to the left wing that was interesting?
The left wing? No. It was different than the right wing?
The upper surface of the left wing was shattered, but the right wing's upper surface wasn't.
It looks like, I mean, you've got decimation of the upper skin of the left wing, but essentially nothing on the right.
The wings were carrying all of the plane's fuel for its trip to Paris. The NTSB says that when the left wing impacted the ocean, the fuel inside the wing was pressurized, causing it to burst.
When the left wing impacted the water, hydraulic forces broke the upper skin of the wing into a large number of pieces.
But in their own animations, the government shows the left wing breaking off in the air.
Its left wing separated from the fuselage, releasing unburned fuel.
With the wing broken off and no longer sealed, with much of the fuel gone and no longer evenly distributed throughout the wing, on impact with the ocean, you're not going to get the hydraulic forces you need to shatter the wing the way it did. But at level flight, with the wings full of fuel, if you introduce high energy into that liquid, you can get the hydraulic forces you need to shatter that wing. There would be a reduction of lift on that left wing. The right wing, undamaged, would have its full lift, and that is what would explain the left turn.
It seemed like the aircraft turned. I could see the flash of the wing because the sun was behind me, setting out here.
The eyewitnesses saw the plane banking. One eyewitness was in a boat and they thought it was going to hit them.
Now, if the left wing did shatter first,
You would expect to find left wing debris in the red zone, the earliest debris field closest to JFK Airport. There was left wing debris in the earliest debris field closest to JFK Airport.
Parallel to the horizon was a cigar-shaped cloud, a long cigar-shaped cloud.
If powerful energy were introduced to the left wing before it broke off, fuel would spray out and immediately vaporize, creating a cloud of white vapor behind the plane.
What color was the cigar-shaped cloud?
White.
It was this white puff.
Like a crystally white puff.
A huge white ball.
A white phosphorus explosion.
I wanted to see for myself if high explosives could have caused that left wing shatter pattern. So I sealed a piece of 747 wing over a container 75% filled with liquid, just like the left wing was. Then I put a quarter pound of TNT into the container and blew it up. Misted liquid blew out of the container, just like the misted fuel blew out of the left wing.
Let's go look for some pieces.
I know I saw two more go over the trees in there someplace.
Really? That far?
Yeah.
That's right here. Rivets sheared off. Almost every rivet on the upper surface of the left wing was sheared away. We have the same fractures that we have pictures of from the wreckage. This fracture right here is just like the fracture that we see on the wreckage. This fracture right here is almost identical to fractures that are found on the accident aircraft. We have pictures of the wreckage that look just like this. Yeah, it appears that we replicated the damage from the accident aircraft.
And one more thing about that left turn caused by the shattered left wing. You can clearly see it on radar. Thanks to Captain Ray Lair, who sued the CIA, we now have the NTSB's own simulation software.
You see these blue triangles and green squares? That's where the plane was according to two separate radar sites. And as you can see here, the NTSB simulations aren't going through those triangles and squares, so they're wrong. If it doesn't fit the radar data, it's not what happened. They're showing the climb, and this is exactly when they're not matching the radar data. So this climb is itself invalid. What really happened to the aircraft is this. When you fit it to the radar data, there is no climb.
We just had an explosion out there about 5 miles away, 6 miles away. We just saw an explosion out here. It just went down. It just exploded and went into the water. It blew up in the air, and then we saw 2 fireballs go down into the water.
Typically, you'll see damage pattern, which will correlate with the injuries. The center fuel tank blowing up or an explosive device inside of the airplane would have caused a burn pattern that would have emanated from one area and progressed in a direction away from where the explosion originated. In the instance of TWA Flight 800, there's no such correlation. From front to back and right to left, the injury patterns were completely atypical. One person might have been severely burned, The person sitting next to them didn't have a mark on their body, and the person sitting next to them may have been completely destroyed.
How do you account for absolutely no patterns? We saw nothing where, for example, those in the vicinity of the center fuel tank would have more damage than those seated elsewhere in the airplane.
Many of the passengers were ejected from their seats at some point during the crash. You could look at seats that had fire damage and see if the individuals who were supposedly sitting there also had fire damage. And in many cases, we found out that they did not. That tells me that the passenger had left that seat prior to the time that the fire had spread into the cabin.
Give you an idea of the crash, this is sometime in mid-August, and I walked down to the morgue and I see a piece of the plane laying there, and I said, what's going on? The plane parts are supposed to go to Calverton, not here. And when you look a little bit closer, you can see a bone which has been shot like an arrow right through the fuselage of that plane. And this, I think, is something that wasn't appreciated by a lot of people. There's a tremendous forces involved here.
The damage to the seats and the injury to the passengers was random, which in my mind indicates a high ordnance detonation, not a low-speed explosion like a center fuel tank blowing up, a high-speed explosion.
Where?
Well, given the fact that we found no point from which it emanated, I think it was external to the aircraft.
April of 2000, the NTSB decided that they would go down to Eglin Air Force Base and shoot stingers, flares, and fireworks. And they would put witnesses on the ground in different locations at various distances from the launch point. And basically the theory was that when they do this, the witnesses would be so at odds at what the eyewitnesses claimed, it would prove conclusively that the eyewitnesses didn't know what they were talking about, and therefore it could be brought up to refute the eyewitnesses in the final hearing. Guess what?
They had a missile visibility test, and it was on the nightly news, and I happened to see it that night. The missile launch was very similar to what I saw out here. It matched pretty identical to it.
Here's an example of how the U.S. media covered the missile visibility test.
Government investigators have confirmed tonight that the Army recently conducted some dramatic tests to disprove once and for all whether or not a missile attack was responsible for the explosion of TWA Flight 800.
Actually, according to the official report, the test was done to determine how far away a witness could be and still see a missile.
Here's NBC's Robert Hager.
The report starts off with a visual cue to remind viewers to connect missiles with conspiracy theories.
3 times, Army contractors fire Stinger missiles similar to this, as NTSB investigators watch below.
Investigators do not stage the test because they seriously believe a missile caused the TWA crash. In fact, they're certain it was not a missile.
Now pay close attention to what he says next.
But they do feel it's important for the record to match what they were able to see in the test with what some eyewitnesses believe they saw off Long Island.
If they're so certain that a missile didn't cause the crash, why would they have to match what the Flight 800 witnesses believed they saw with the missiles the eyewitnesses actually saw during the test in Florida?
Eyewitnesses like Vietnam vet Fred Meyer, who was in a helicopter that night.
I followed the streak of light, red-orange in color, moving from my left center to my further left.
Meyer says then he saw explosions similar to this.
Actually, this, the plane descending in a fireball, is not what he saw next. What he saw next was...
I saw an explosion, and the explosion was on the trajectory of the streak of light I had been following.
The descending fireball was the last thing Major Meyer saw.
Why are investigators sure it wasn't a missile? It's this reconstruction. No residue of any missile explosives, none.
This is false. Government investigators did report finding explosive residues on the plane.
Instead, a pattern of twisted metal that shows the explosion that did bring the plane down originated here in the center fuel tank.
And this is also false. There is no evidence confirming that the explosion that brought down the plane originated in the center fuel tank.
And no continuous holes in a straight line through the wreckage, which would have had to have been left if a missile penetrated.
Not if it were a proximity fused missile that does not penetrate but explodes nearby. This and many other media reports persistently focused on missiles that could penetrate the plane.
So investigators believe what eyewitnesses saw was the trail of fire left in the sky by the falling plane itself.
Well before seeing this descending fireball, many witnesses reported seeing an object rise up off the surface.
What investigators really believe is that the fuel tank exploded because of an electrical short or some other mechanical problem.
What investigators? No ignition source was ever confirmed. And what other mechanical problems? The reporter provides no details.
And nothing they observed in the new missile test has changed their minds.
But he never reports the results of the test. The results that show that all observers easily saw the missile.
Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
What about detonation at some distance, perhaps a self-destruct scenario?
It's possible that several types of missiles could have been in the vicinity of TWA Flight 800 at the time of the mishap. But the possibility that that occurred is hard to imagine.
Did you ever look at my analysis of the radar information that actually showed some evidence of a high-energy explosion on radar?
Yes.
Since it happened so close to shore, 10 miles off of Long Island, in a very busy air corridor, there are several FAA radar sites that recorded the crash.
The field to the left is consistent with the explosion.
At the Baltimore hearing, they showed this radar image, which shows 20 minutes of debris drifting with the wind after the plane explodes. But what they didn't talk about in their presentation is this, the first few seconds after the plane lost electrical power. The radar shows debris flying away from the plane at a speed of at least Mach 4, which is 4 times the speed of sound. No detonation velocity lower than Mach 4 fit the data very well. So, yeah. Now, the explosion of the center wing fuel tank, they determined was a low velocity explosion, meaning that it went slower than the speed of sound. So any wreckage that is shown going faster than the speed of sound could not have come from that explosion. And so any high-speed debris that came out, which we calculated at Mach 4, definitely was not from the center wing tank explosion. Couldn't have been. And that's what disproves this case. I mean, that is the smoking gun. Missiles are have rounded surfaces, and like stealth fighters, do not give a very good signature. However, once a missile explodes, it's bright. It's a bright light. You throw up confetti at night and you shine a flashlight, you're going to see it. And that's what this was, a bunch of confetti moving at Mach 4.
You're looking at 3,000 miles an hour as the initial velocity, somewhere in that range.
Probably greater than that, but yeah, at least, yeah.
Okay. Huh. That's pretty high explosive. It certainly smells like a missile when you look at those findings. When you see this kind of information, you have to say it's a missile, and let's prove that it wasn't. And I don't see any evidence that anybody attempted to rule out that this was a missile, not in any honest scientific way, at least.
TWA 800, man the altitude maintain 13,000, 13,000 only for now.
After climbing out of JFK Airport, Flight 800 leveled off at 13,000 feet. Moments later, a fast-moving object was seen racing horizontally out to sea from Long Island's south shore, heading east-southeast. One of the dozens of eyewitnesses who saw Object 1 was Lisa Perry.
And I see something that's going across the sky. It's going very quickly. It looked kind of like that Superman bullet.
A few miles offshore, it turned upward and began climbing while heading south.
And it wavered and zigzagged as it flew.
Then it turned. At this time, a second object rose off the ocean miles away and further to the east. Both objects began converging on Flight 800. Object 2 approached the jetliner head-on.
And then start climbing, passing my altitude.
Pilot Vasilis Bakunis, flying at 2,000 feet, saw the object rising from below his altitude. Meanwhile, Object 1 headed behind and to the right of Flight 800. It suddenly turned left toward the jetliner and exploded near Flight 800's left wing. The detonation of Object 1 near the airplane caused the upper surface of the left wing to shatter. As the plane banked to the left, misted fuel coming out of the top of the left wing made a thick white plume of vapor behind the jetliner. Then, Object 2 exploded with 2 nearly simultaneous explosions.
2 ordnance explosions.
The time difference between the 2 explosions was a fraction of seconds.
A third object came racing out of the ocean and climbed sharply. It appeared to come from a ship.
At night, in the evening, ships turn on their lights. Sometimes they'll have a bright mast light. This particular vessel had a very bright mast light. From the mast light, there was another flash, and I saw another object rise out of the ocean.
Object 3 exploded underneath the aircraft's nose, causing it to fall off. As the aircraft fell to the ocean, its wings broke off, creating 2 huge fireballs in the sky.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the National Transportation Safety Board.
The cause of the in-flight breakup of TWA Flight 800 was a fuel-air explosion in the center wing tank.
After 4 years of working on this, I assume that you would have liked to have been able to come here today in front of the family members and tell them what the ignition source was.
Sir, I would just love to be able to walk in here with a molten piece of wire and say, here it is. But no, sir, I cannot walk up and say this is the piece.
J'espère encore toujours qu'un jour, on va avoir la vérité sur ce qui s'est passé et que les personnes, et essentiellement les politiques, qui cachent cette affaire depuis 15 ans finiront par avouer ce qu'ils ont fait.
No eyewitnesses testified at the hearing. Instead, the NTSB's Dr. David Mayer, the same guy who changed evidence tags in Hank's hangar, gave an hour-long presentation explaining why eyewitnesses are unreliable.
Psychologist Ira Hyman has written that people combine knowledge from various sources with their own personal experience to create memories. It's been well documented that people's memories change over time. Even memories that we are sure of can contain errors. Witness accounts can change over time. Witnesses' memories do change over time. People's memories change over time.
David Mayer's Mr. Fix-It. You know, he fixed the tags, he fixed the witness statements.
A group put a full-page ad in the Washington Times, including 6 witness accounts. What do you think about those accounts?
Well, I actually have the ad with me. The final witness in the advertisements identified as witness 649.
Witness 649 is Joseph Delgado.
Witness 649 described events that certainly do sound like a missile attacking the airplane. And witness 649 said that everything he saw occurred between the 2 flagpoles. The yellow line shows his line of sight between those 2 flagpoles.
They said everything he saw occurred between these 2 flagpoles, and it looks like a single line. It isn't a single line, it's 2 lines, but they're 2 degrees apart.
It happened somewhere in here.
So we're looking at like a 20, 30-degree angle separation.
Or better.
He had a baseball field in front of him. He wasn't constricted by his viewpoint.
It wasn't just 2 degrees. It wasn't a very narrow angle.
No way.
No way.
No.
So it doesn't appear that this witness was looking in the right location to see Flight 800 at the spot where it would have been struck by a hypothetical missile.
Next, Dr. Mayer talks about eyewitness Fred Meyer, a war veteran who flew rescue helicopters in Vietnam.
He observed a streak in flight for about 1 or 2 seconds, and then he saw the enormous fireball develop.
Mr. Mayer here did not tell the whole truth. He mentioned something that occurred at the very end of my statements. I saw a streak of light crossing the sky in a nearly horizontal direction. And then I saw an explosion, which was, in my estimation, a high-velocity explosion, a military ordnance, something I'd seen many times before. And then after having made that statement, I made statements regarding watching the fireball descend to the ocean.
The witness observations of a streak of light were not related to a missile. The TWA Flight 800 in-flight breakup was initiated by a fuel-air explosion in the center wing tank. The source of ignition energy for the explosion could not be determined with certainty. This then completes the 4-year investigation into the tragedy of TWA 800, and I adjourned this board meeting.
I lived in Mashpee. It's a little town on Cape Cod. You know, made our own ice cream, made our own root beer, had 4 kids. It was a wonderful childhood. My father was an oceanographer. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And it was like a dream. You know, life was a dream. And the birds were beautiful, you know, nature, go on canoe trips, camping. When I was 7 years old, my mother died. And when something like that happens, it changes you. You start to see the value of life, you know. You have a, you know, you have a beautiful mother that loves you, and you're very young, and you're very dependent on that woman.
The way to reopen the investigation legally is to file what they call a petition for reconsideration. This petition goes to the NTSB. We're going to write our name on the line. If you would like to participate, we welcome you to sign it too.
We're going to read our findings, and we're going to all sign them here in front of you. Number 1, the explosion that caused the crash was external to the aircraft. Number 2, FAA radar sites recorded fast-moving debris that traveled perpendicular to the flight path, no mechanism or event in the official theory can account for this radar evidence. A significant number of credible eyewitness accounts are consistent with an external event. The CIA produced an inaccurate crash animation. Both the CIA and NTSB crash simulations are inaccurate. There remain significant anomalies in the way this investigation was conducted. There were numerous violations of customary and normal investigative protocol. The NTSB's probable cause determination for this crash of Flight 800 is not supported by the physical evidence, the eyewitness statements, and other facts.
An object traveled a great distance at great speed and converged with it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I mean, it's very frustrating that nobody gives a shit anymore. You know, you try to, it's a very difficult thing. You have to try to forget and move on, and I think that's important for a lot of people, but to not have this explored to the depth that it should be is wrong.